neighborhood friendly security officer. Another reading world history, as this is the fourth quarter of my program for educating the youth. Next generation of leaders or future leaders, cannot afford for productive people like myself to get it perfect. My apologies throughout all my videos if I mispronounce a word. Listening to facts helps the mind to understand the lies and the truth. So, without further ado, continue to push goals to the forefront. Check on learning. Questions will prepare us to be on the lookout for the information that's written within the text. Okay, I have 7 questions. First question: what is the name of the first civilization in Mesopotamia? 2. How did geography help civilizations develop in the area? 3. What is Cuneiform, and why was it important to Sumerian society? 4. What is a city-state? 5. Who was King Sargon I of Akkadian, and why was he so important? 6. What were some of the accomplishments of the Babylonians? 7. Who was, I cannot pronounce the name, so I'll spell it, Hammurabi, and what was his contribution to the Babylonian Empire? Let's begin. Sumeria was the first civilization in Mesopotamia and developed around 4000 BCE. The Sumerians relied on annual floods to deposit rich soil onto the riverbanks every spring. The Sumerians used irrigation and drainage ditches to control the flow of water, but there were still surprise floods that washed entire areas out. This convinced the Sumerians that other forces were at work. People turned to religion to explain destructive floods. Religion and the ruling class. The Sumerians were a polytheistic people. They hoped that if they obeyed and served the gods, they'd get a good harvest. Polytheism, spelled Polytheism, means the belief in many gods. Continue reading. They built and dedicated ziggurats, spelled Ziggurats. So the Sumerians built and dedicated ziggurats to the chief god and goddess of a city. Sumeria was spelled Theocracy, theocracy, in which priests held an authoritative role because Sumerians believed gods ultimately ruled the land. Kings ruled by divine right and lived in large palaces. Theocracy is a form of government in which God or a deity is the supreme ruler. Priests who were able to read, okay? Read. Not everyone in civilization were on the same level of academics, curriculums, Priests educated on history, written history, prehistory, whether they were writing with symbols, shapes. The priests were there as intelligent figures. Why some of the royalty, most of those with power had a priest who was an advisor. Not everyone was able to read and write in the beginning stages of civilization. Writing and education. Around 3000 BCE, the Sumerians created cuneiform, a form of writing based on making wedge-shaped impressions with reeds on soft clay tablets. Once the impressions were made, the tablets were put in the sun to dry, and there could be no more changes. Cuneiform was used to keep records and write stories and poems. It took a long time to make a tablet, so it was important to have professional writers called scribes. Scribes studied at schools and then went to work as copyists, teachers, lawmakers, and leaders. They were an important part of the Sumerian society. And thanks to them, history was recorded in words. City-states. The Sumerian kingdom was made up of city-states, in which cities that also acted as politically independent states. Each had its own government, army, and king. Trade between city-states was regulated through religious temples, which also functioned as storage units for surplus goods. Goods like wool and wheat were bartered for timber and imported copper. Priests often collected rent from farmers and acted as tax collectors in each city-state. Priests. They did more than just give a sermon to the mass. Priests served a vital and played an important role in civilization, development, evolution. But the city-states also fought each other for land and water, eventually leading to the downfall of Mesopotamia as the first civilization, spelled Akkadia, Akkadia. Akkadia was led for over 50 years, around 2334 to 2279 before Common Era, BCE, by King Sargon I, who was considered the first great king in history. King Sargon I united the Sumerian city-states. Around 1900 BCE, the Sumerian city-states fell to a northern rival, Babylonia. Babylon. The Babylonians lived in the western half of the Fertile Crescent. The most well-known Babylonian leader was spelled Hammurabi. I'm sorry if I couldn't pronounce that correctly. Who conquered northern Sumerian cities such as Sumer and Akkad to create a Babylonian empire around 1800 BCE. The Babylonians built roads to encourage trade and make travel easier. Goods like cloth and spices could come in from as far as India and Egypt. Merchants and traders managed their own businesses. Hammurabi. I'm sorry if I couldn't pronounce that correctly. Is most famous for a list of 282 laws called Hammurabi's Code. Sorry, I couldn't pronounce his name correctly. This was the first time laws were written out, and therefore the first time people could know how they would be punished if they committed a crime. The laws were based on the idea of an eye for an eye, meaning that the punishment should be equally as bad as the crime. However, the punishment varied according to the class of the victim and the lawbreaker. The code covered all aspects of daily life, punishment for everything from judges who incorrectly ruled on cases to builders who built houses that collapsed. Men held the most power in, is spelled Patriarchal, and it was a society of Mesopotamia. And they could also punish women and children. Empire was conquered and destroyed in the early 1500s BCE. Follow me though. Back on track. Assyria, the kingdom of Assyria, rose around 1400 BCE and was one of the first new empires in Mesopotamia. The Assyrian Empire occupied the northern part of Mesopotamia in what is now northern Iraq. The land where Assyria was located was easy for the outsiders to get into and attack, so the Assyrians learned to be skilled warriors and decided to strike instead of waiting to be attacked. They conquered lands from the Nile River to the Persian Gulf. King Sargon II, the most important leader of Assyria, ruled from 722 to 705 BCE. Kings ruled this massive empire with absolute power, meaning that whatever the king decided became law. The Assyrians developed a system of communication with riders on horses delivering messages across the empire within a week. This kept the king and his governors in contact. They also developed trade networks as far as the Mediterranean. Assyria's capital city became a center of learning. It housed one of the world's first libraries, storing a collection of dried clay tablets. The Assyrians were defeated by the Medes, the Persians, and the Scythians in 612 BCE. Babylon Chaldeans. Around 612 BCE, Babylon rose again under the Chaldeans, who were masters of mathematics and astronomy. The Babylonians were the first to identify 5 of the other planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They learned about the planets and stars by actually assigning workers to chart them every night. Remember the order of the first civilizations of Mesopotamia, with Sumerians first, Assyrians second, Akkadians third, and Babylonians fourth. The answers to the check on learning questions. 1. The first civilization of Mesopotamia was Sumeria. 2. The first civilizations started in the Fertile Crescent, where the rich soil produced abundant crops for people to grow food and thrive. 3. Cuneiform is a form of writing created by Sumerians using reeds on clay tables. It was important because Sumerians used it to keep records and write down stories and poems. 4. A city-state is a city that is politically independent with its own government, army, and king. 5. King Sargon I was the leader of Assyria for over 50 years and united Sumerian city-states. The Babylonians built roads to encourage travel and trade goods from India and Egypt. Merchants and traders ran their own businesses. 7. Spelled Hammurabi, was the leader of Babylon, who conquered northern Sumerian cities to create the Babylonian Empire. He is most famous for his list of 282 laws, called Hammurabi's Code. This was the first time laws were written down.